Welcome back to Politics Nation on MS Now. On Monday, the nation will honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at a time when the civil rights he fought and died for seem under more threat than at perhaps any moment since Dr. King's assassination nearly 60 years ago. Joining me now to discuss this and more is a distinguished guest, Eric Holder, former U.S. Attorney General under President Barack Obama. Mr. Holder, we appreciate you joining us tonight. I want to start with Minneapolis. The legal argument coming from the administration right now seems to be that local politicians like Governor Walz and Mayor Frey are conspiring to obstruct federal immigration enforcement efforts, and that public resistance is a form of domestic terrorism against a duly elected president who has the constitutional authority to do what he's doing. Having led the Justice Department for more than 6 years, does that argument hold up?
That argument is absurd. Our Constitution talks about the right to assemble. That is a First Amendment right. The ability of people to protest government practices is something that you see throughout our history. The notion that somehow you would go after the governor and the mayor for doing something that is political speech and, again, protected by the First Amendment is just crazy. And it's really in striking stark contrast to the fact that this administration, this Justice Department, say that they don't have the ability or there's nothing to look at with regard to the shooting of Renee Good. So they're not going to investigate that, but they are going to investigate the mayor and the governor in a way that is patently unconstitutional.
Now, Trump has repeatedly threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act in Democrat-led cities that resisted his agenda, using as a kind of ultimate weapon for dealing with domestic unrest. Following incidents this week in Minneapolis, the president has repeated that threat in Minnesota. What would the act actually allow Trump to do, and just how far would it allow the administration to go?
Well, if the act were legitimately used, it means that you could use troops to actually do police-related activities to maintain order in a city. But generally, what you have to show in order to invoke the Insurrection Act is that local law enforcement doesn't have the capacity to maintain order. And I would say that the reason that you don't have order in Minnesota or in Minneapolis, to the extent that you can make that argument, is because of the conduct that we have seen by people who work for the federal government, and specifically those who work for ICE. The citizens of the state, the citizens of Minneapolis, are simply out on the streets and protesting, using their phones to record that which they think is inappropriate. And we have seen these videos where people working for ICE are breaking windows on cars, snatching people out of cars, kicking people when they were down on the ground. So it doesn't seem to me that there's any basis for the invocation of the Insurrection Act. We need better conduct on the part of those who represent this administration through ICE.
Immigration enforcement and National Guard deployments have put troops at odds with several state governments. In Congress, even some members of Trump's party are breaking with him over a war powers resolution for Venezuela. And then you have the Supreme Court's pending ruling on Trump's tariffs, which could trigger another fight for Trump with a competing branch of government. How do all these conflicts define where Trump's agenda is right now constitutionally? And what could this mean for the direction that our country is headed in?
Well, the Supreme Court has a number of important cases in front of it that will decide in a substantial way the direction of this nation. Whether or not these tariffs are in fact constitutional. We look at the Voting Rights Act and whether or not that will continue to be a viable piece of legislation. It is the diamond, the pearl of the civil rights movement, and that is under attack. The Section 2 case, a Calais case, that is going to be decided by the court. The whole question of the independence of the Federal Reserve, that is a question before the court as well. There's a whole variety of things that are before the court, and my hope would be that the court will look to precedent, will look to principle, and will apply constitutional reasoning, not ideological reasoning, in making decisions in all of these cases. But the court has an enormous amount of power. But I think we have to understand something here, Rev. You know, it's hard for me to say this, but I think it's true. Our institutions have failed us. The Supreme Court has failed us repeatedly. The executive branch continues to fail us. Congress has not done what it is supposed to do, what it is empowered to do. And it really is up to us, the American people, to make sure that this nation stays on the path that we were on until very recently. If we want to make progress in this country, if we want to be, you know, a multiracial, multidimensional nation, it's going to be upon the people of the United States using the rights that they have. And that means getting into the street and doing things not in a violent way, not in a property damaging way, but expressing themselves, and then ultimately in November voting against those who have done things inconsistent with our Constitution.
Now, you mentioned the U.S. Supreme Court. It is set to decide on a Louisiana case that could determine whether Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which bans racial discrimination in voting procedures, remains constitutional. At the same time, midterms are about 10 months away, and several mostly Republican states have redrawn their voting maps at the president's demand. These newly drawn electoral maps may be in place when voters go to the polls. How will both of these issues impact the next election?
Well, one thing you can certainly say, Donald Trump's demand of Texas that they give him 5 additional congressional seats is a sign of weakness. If Republicans were really proud of the big, beautiful bill, if they were proud of the way in which they're conducting their immigration policy, if they were proud of the way in which they are conducting themselves with regard to the protection of our environment, they wouldn't have to do the kinds of things that they are trying to do now, which is to gerrymander in these states. Texas, obviously terrible, what they've done in Missouri, what they've done in North Carolina. I suspect what they're going to try to do in Florida as well. And so we have got to, in the Democratic states, we have to respond to that. And what I think California has done was appropriate. What we're seeing coming out of Virginia, I think, is appropriate. These are all things that I think are difficult for Democrats to do, but yet we have to be tough. We have to respond to that which they are trying to do. The Calais case before the Supreme Court with regard to Section 2 could potentially move as many as 19 seats from the Republican side, from the Democratic side to the Republican side by doing away with majority-minority districts, primarily in the South. That is a case that I'm looking very strongly at, and hope that the Supreme Court will do something consistent with what this very same Supreme Court did just 2 years ago when they said that Section 2 was extremely viable and used Section 2 to say that the way Alabama had drawn its maps was racially discriminatory. So we'll see what happens.
Now, you led a Justice Department that prioritized civil rights, voting rights, and police misconduct reform. 10 years after that administration ended, the DOJ Civil Rights Division is unrecognizable in terms of mission. Instead, it has turned that mission towards combating alleged widespread anti-white and anti-Christian bias in America. As we mark Dr. King's life, we will honor you at the National Action Network breakfast on Monday, because the things you fought for, the fact that you achieved the Attorney General's position was direct results of fruit from the tree that Martin Luther King represented. As a historic figure and as one that was in the trenches all of your life in the area of justice in this country, how do you see the nation as we approach Martin Luther King Day on Monday?
Well, I think we're in a period of maximum danger. This is, I think, an inflection point. The nation has to decide, what kind of America do we want to be? Do we want to be one that reflects the values, the rhetoric, the action, the sacrifices of Dr. King and other warriors in the civil rights movement that made this nation not only better for African Americans, but for all Americans, women, Hispanics, Americans generally benefited from that which happened in the civil rights movement. Do we want to continue on that arc, or do we want to go back? I think what this administration wants to do is to resegregate America, to put people in their place. That is people of color. They want to put women in their place. They want to put people in the LGBTQ community in their place. They want to take us back to when they say make America great again. I always wonder, when did you think America was great? And I think they have in their own minds kind of a 1950s America where black folks were not heard from, women stayed at home, that opportunities were not made available to people generally. So this is a time. This is a time for Americans to decide, am I going to fight for that which I think this nation should stand for? We can't accept it. We can't capitulate. We can't collaborate. We have to be strong in the fight for American ideals, fighting for what our Constitution says this nation, how this nation should be constituted.
Former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, thank you for being with us. Look forward to seeing you Monday morning.